right, welcome to Elephant in the Room. I am your melanated educator, Maya Institute. As you can see my oily face, it is hot. All right, let me do some adjustments here. I hope you all can hear that pretty good. Um, just a little bit of feedback coming in there. Sorry. Because I have the volume turned up, and I think I figured out how to try to synchronize so you all can listen while I run the video. Um, just playing with this. It's just gonna take me going through a week of playing with it, which I have not had the opportunity to do. It's so funny when you're off from doing your regular schedule, how much other stuff you feel it with, right? We live busy lives. So I am in my garage. Garage. It's hot, but I like being outside, and I don't want to be in the backyard because bugs are gonna get me. But my son did cut down the trees back there because they were hanging low. So maybe next week I will brave it. But it's quite warm actually at this time of day in the backyard. But I have lots of trees back there. My lemon tree is coming along. I replanted it. It survived the replantation. That's a challenge when you have new plants. When you replant them, sometimes it doesn't like its new environment. It doesn't survive well. So that's an update on that. Updates on my dieting. I think it's going well. I've been posting some of my exercises on my personal Facebook page to inspire people to get on prompted and started. And one of the things that I said was it's interesting that we talk revolution and things like that, but we're not going to revolutionize anything out of shape. So we have to get in shape, you all, and get our minds and bodies better and healed in order to combat. Mind, body, and spirit have to be in place in order to combat this ugly thing called racism and colonization. And it's still going on to this day, believe it or not, colonization. Uh, and it's in the form of formed governments, cooing other formed governments, and putting in place who they want to be put in place, and undermining the will of the people, undermining what the people want in that particular region. Um, and so, these things are real. They're happening. It's happened to the U.S. in our past history with the Native Americans. And so that kind of catapults me into my discussion today, which is on borders divided, we fall. What do I mean by that? Borders divided, we fall. Sovereign nations have, created borders for themselves because of invasions, because of political unrest, because of disagreements. Basically, if you want to go really basic with it, these are basically, in my observation and study of history, what I observe is usually people who were once related in one way or another, either by being of the same country, type of people, birth, culture, um, sharing practices, religious practices, etc. They all shared something at one point in time. And basically, as time went on, uh, people decided to um, break free from each other, and groups decided to conduct business um, and ask their followers to conduct business in a particular shape, form, or fashion, whether it's a practice or belief system or government or um, business or family. Okay, I mean, you could break it down into all those categories and probably even some more that I didn't think of. But this is just basically people breaking apart relationships that were once solid. Maybe there became some turbulence in between, and it resulted in breaking apart, a lot of times violently. Violently. I was just watching this particular show. It's called Borders, and I subscribe to it because even throughout everyone's um, perception of a reality, um, you can kind of sift through and decide what the truth is according to what you're able to perceive. And people who are inside of that conflict are going to look at it totally different than those outside of the conflict. So the one that I was watching, the first was the Haitians in the Dominican Republic, and um, I like to go through the comments because a lot of times people who are closely related will comment first because they're sensitive about what people are reporting on their country, their culture, and conflicts. And what I noticed was that the same thing that happens here in the U.S. as far as our truth, what happened in the colonial periods with the Native Americans, what has happened with the severe importation of Africans to the country, being a colony, um, which basically is just the code word for raping, stealing, and pillaging. That's what colonization is. It is a people deciding that they want to take hold of a land. They try to negotiate originally, but when they realize negotiations aren't going to work, they turn to violence in order to get what it is that they're looking to have, which is usually land and control of some sort of resource. And so, once that seizure happens, then they create laws and rules and borders so that no one else can come in and do exactly what they just did. Is really the gist of it. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because we have created mind borders in our own community as far as the Black culture experience. And it is actually destroying us from inside out. We're imploding and we don't realize it. And it's becoming more and more obvious. Every time there's a settlement between the culture groups within the Black community, another group arises and decides that they don't want to be a part of it, or that their movement is different, or that they don't have the same shared experience for this, that, and another reason. And it is causing us to slowly but surely divide. And the prevailing thought that came into my mind upon witnessing and observing this, um, being within a lot of those mental borders that have been created for us by our elders, and it's carrying over to the next generation, and we're choosing which side we want to be on, subconsciously and consciously. Um, what I am noticing is that uh, it's quite possible that, as people say, history repeats itself. That's all we're doing is repeating history. We are a slave to history. We are um, subject to repeating it, and it's a merry-go-round that we're not able to get off of. We can't stop. And this is the legacy of human existence. It's conflict, battle, war with small pockets of peace. And I wonder sometimes if we will ever get off of the circular merry-go-round and make the extension upward, which is graduation to our higher self. We are we are living within our lower uh, existence, our lower self, our lower spectrum. And people who study metaphysics are trying to tell us about this in the best way that they can with words, with the limitation of words that we have to describe the natural world around us and the world that we can see and cannot see, the dimensions that we can see and cannot see. And they're trying their best to get us to see that the paradigm in which we are living in is a loop, and the loop is causing us to repeat the same mistakes of the past, and we try to reincorporate them into the future, but really it's the same thing, which is what racism is. Racism is a reincarnate of itself. It continues to change over time, and um, those who are fighting against it are beginning to realize this truth, that when we think we've defeated racism, bigotry, and colonization, prejudice on a certain front, that it just morphs into something else. And those who intend to keep it going, because there is one truth, and that is greed. And greed is what is driving it all. Greed is what is causing all of this conflict when I look at it. So the one that I watched today, and this is just a generalization, I'm being very summary in this because I don't I really don't care about who did what when. What I look at is the basics. So, what is the original sin? What was the catalyst that fueled the fire of all fires? So, the conflict is between the Korean people and the Japanese people. Right now, there are Koreans living in Japan who are ostracized for not assimilating into Japanese culture, and they have decided to fight back in their own way. So, what was the original sin here? Let's look at it that way to try to filter through all of these truths that people are telling because there's several layers. The original truth was that the Japanese basically enslaved the Koreans. Okay, they turned them into sex slaves for the women, and the men were forced to work. That is the cold, harsh reality. If you're Japanese and ever come across this show, and that is a difficult truth to swallow, you say, but that's what happened. That is what happened. That is the original sin between the Koreans and the Japanese. The Japanese enslaved the Koreans. And from that original sin, there have been many other conflicts and there have been many other problems and many battles and the ongoing war that many of us don't know about, but these people are dealing with. They right now have elders in their community that they've created. It's like a small peninsula that they've created for themselves, um, where they try to hold on to their culture, and the Japanese don't want them to hold on to their culture. They want them to assimilate. All right. The Koreans don't want to do that, and so they've had support from the northern Koreans in their conflict. Um, Financially, have supported them until that was broken up. And again, I'm speaking in general from what I've learned. I haven't studied it deeply, but this is just the general information, and this is just so far from one source of information. I would have to study further, but this is just the general conflict. And uh, the Koreans have implemented several programs to where graduates from high school get to go back and sojourn to Korea and learn more about their roots. They have pushed really hard. There was a time where they had an upward economy of, what was it, $2.5 billion due to their efforts to maintain the culture within their confines, and that was broken up by the Japanese government. But one interesting thing and factoid that I was able to discover in all this is that the Western worlds had an involvement in the breaking up of Korea, North and South. We already know what the Western world's influence is on Japan. We already know what the United States did to Japan. And so to even simplify it even more, because I try to keep my mind simple and not go into all these specialized conflicts and say, but see here, they did this and that's where they became wrong. Mm-mm. What was the original conflict, the original sin? What was the catalyst to start it all? And so Japan is behaving European like, I would like to call it European esque. European esque to me is the concept is domination. People often parallel the world's uh, relationship with European powers as the entity that cannot and will not get along with anyone. They will not live and let live for some reason or another. And how that relates to Black culture is we have adopted some of those ideals and personalities, and we've incorporated into our way of thinking, in which we believe that our religion is the only one that could be practiced and should be practiced, and everyone else shall perish if they do not. We believe in the way that we live in our own households should be modeled after. Nobody else should have any other way of doing things. We do it within our own families, in which we think that a good example of that is if we, find out that a family member is homosexual. That's the best example right now because We're taught that we're heterosexual and that there's no other in between or no other option thereof. It could possibly, there's no, in this infinite universe of biological and non biologic beings, there's no way possible a homosexual could exist. And that's my problem with the whole idea of it. A lot of people are staunchly against homosexuality. Part of it is reproductive, but most of it is ignorance. I could understand a reproductive argument that if homosexuals existed in large numbers, then our existence could be challenged. That is a fact. That is true. But that is not what is happening. And that is not why people ostracize homosexuals. It's not. It's mostly out of ignorance. It is mostly out of the belief system that everyone is the same, that everyone should think the same, and everyone should do the same things. And this is one of the harder pills to swallow when you begin to talk about homosexuality. I have homosexuals in my family, and I refuse to hate them. I refuse to tell them that they're wrong, and I refuse to treat them like they're anything other than a human being. And if people don't like me because of that, so what? I don't care. I really don't. And I will not ostracize or make homosexuals feel as if they're diseased or they're a plague. What I will begin to investigate over time is whether or not the homosexual movement is truly genuine for some, or are some latching on to it because of hurt and pain. That is a real um, topic of discussion, because some people were made to be homosexual because of perversions. Okay, and that is a real thing, but that is not the entire story of homosexuality. That is not everyone's walk. You can't just throw everybody into some perversion um, bucket and say that's why they're homosexual, because there are many people who identify with the homosexual community and the many variations thereof, that's just not their experience. And so that goes back to the bucket list of ignorance and the borders that we create in our minds, that once we partition off our belief systems and what they're supposed to be, there's no room for anything else. And that is a European frame of mind. That is not an original African worldview. As I study and learn more about the African worldview, it just was not one of those ideals. Now, some will claim that, in the traditional African communities, you didn't find a lot of homosexuality. Not trying to stay on that subject, but just to lightly touch on it. But that's up for debate. That is really up for debate, because there's others who have found evidence that this was a normal practice. It was widely accepted, and it was no big deal because it was a small minority of people that felt that way. And so, especially when you start getting into the Amazonian women and variations thereof of those communities that exist and still exist to this day. There's one going on in that I was just studying. What was that community? Oh my goodness! But basically, they're is it in Kenya? I might be citing the wrong country. I apologize. But basically, what's happening with this community is that um, the women overwhelmingly pushed out the men and lived as a woman village, mostly because of the hardships that were existing in the male dominated villages, the patriarchy. So they created a matriarchy, and they've been actively fighting the men out, and the men have come to accept that women don't want the men there, and the only men they will allow there are the men that will voluntarily adapt to a woman ruler. And so that's a difference in culture, but that's what's going on, and it's a direct response to the patriarch that's going there, where women are, it's where women are being where they're still practicing mutilation. um oh god, why am I losing the term? So women's circumcisions involuntarily, that's what's going on in those communities. And so that's what we are talking about. It still comes down to borders in our mind, belief systems, borders that we create in our mind. Even when you look at the maps and you look at these borders that we believe in, the land is not divided up. It has not divided itself. These are invisible land markers that we've put here. We've placed human beings around them, some walls in certain cases, but the land itself has not bordered itself off. The land has separated itself over time due to cataclysmic events that have separated the earth, but human beings are the reason why there are these deep separations. And so divided we fall is happening. You cannot dispute it. Because of all of these divisions, the world is literally in turmoil. It's my own personal belief system that because of this overwhelming patriarchal society is why, because we believe the man should just be the ultimate leader. And I just think that that's a mistake, because if the man was supposed to be an ultimate leader, why are we produced in pairs? Why are we men and women, and why are most embryos more, why do we have more women than men if that's the case? Conceptually, why did nature design women to live longer than men? And it's not to say that women should take over the leadership and just begin to um, do more, but it's just to say maybe the way that we've been heading things has been wrong, because in this man dominated world, look at it. It's proof around us. We're living in chaos in this male dominated world, with male belief systems being on the forefront. When women rule, like in our households, we believe in diplomacy, we believe in nurturing, we believe in love, we believe in understanding, we believe in forgiveness. That is the key models. But when men dominate, it's kind of opposite of that. So somebody's playing music in the background. I hope this don't mess up my video, because YouTube would be like, oh, well, there's music playing in the background. Maybe I have to put up a little sub comment here. Try to see if this works. So we'll see if that happens. That helps. But I don't know if that'll help, because YouTube is so funny about playing people music, but it's playing in the background. There's nothing I can do about that. Somebody must be having a good time because it's Memorial Day. Oh, that's another great thing that I found out about, to kind of take a break from our borders of the mind. It's Memorial Day weekend. For years, my family and I, we would go up and visit the graves of our loved ones, especially my mom. We would go visit her site, and we did it for many, many years. That's the way that they chose to pay gratitude, and eventually became my Uncle Al, and then eventually over time my grandfather. I don't know if we still keep that same tradition like we used to, but it was something that we did, and it was important to them to do that. And it helped shape and mold me to never forget the legacy of my mother and my father. Although, as an adult, I want to do more searching into their lives. My grandmother, from my father, his mother, she passed, and she used to tell me different stuff about him. She had a lot of pictures, which, unfortunately, a lot of those pictures are still, I don't want to say unfortunately, but in a way it's unfortunately, because, I would like to have some of those pictures, as they, it is my father, but our family can be, sometimes they don't want to let go of stuff. So, anyway, I was watching a special about Memorial Day, and I posted it on Facebook, and Roots actually did this one, which a lot of people criticize Roots as being a interesting paper or news site that kind of is being led by a multicultural um, persuasion. Whoa. The bug is like, zzz, zzz. Did y'all see that? I don't know. It was close enough. You may have saw it. But and the interesting history on Memorial Day is that it was originally started after the Civil War, according to this particular source. And they talked with a historian too that came on and confirmed the story. that it was actually started by African Americans. Memorial Day was, and it's not widely acknowledged in that way, but that's how it was started. And it was started because after the Civil War, there was um, an arena, was it, of some sort? What was it? It was an arena or basically a big building area that um, they used to basically create this mass grave for people um, who were captured during um, the Confederate South's warring against its own countrymen, and they buried people there in this mass grave. And what those soldiers and African Americans did who fought in the war, they dug those people up and they went and buried them in a big cemetery to honor their bodies and not let them just sit there in that mass grave like that. They didn't want to dishonor them like that. And they did song, they had preachers say prayers, and they had a little choir sing. I think it was a children's choir sing, if I remember what I watched. And they created this ritual, and I guess they would come back and do it every single year. And somehow the U.S. government got wind of it, and they changed it. They changed it into a soldier holiday and things like that. And that's not that's not what it was at first. That was not the meaning at first, but it changed over time as culture can and does. But I find it interesting that when we talk about Memorial Day, the U.S. never talks about this story. Why? What is the United States afraid of? And so, that's some history, some lost history. Oh, I forgot that I had left my earring in the car. My mind be going everywhere. Okay, I gotta get my other earring out of the car. Remind me, y'all. But anyway, so that's some lost history that we don't get to talk about, right? As far as uh, how Memorial Day started. Isn't it so interesting that when we start looking at a lot of these histories and a lot of things that African Americans have such a great presence in this country? I mean, and for just such great things, great things that aren't talked about. It was very hot when I got out here. I was sweating, but my body has calmed down, and I'm not sweating as much, which is cool. So I thought that was interesting break there. Memorial Day. I mean, that still can go to borders because the Confederate South was trying to create a new border for the South for the purposes of businesses and maintaining the institution of slavery because that was their main mode of commerce. That's how they made their money. And they did not want to let that go because what else would they do? Even though the North had tried to encourage them to build more factories and start going into that model, not that they were owning slaves too. And not that it was even about slavery for the North, it was just more about controlling the capital and of course, different political parties always want power, greed, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that unfortunately, human beings is so complex, and when you look at these conflicts that are happening and that continue to happen, we see that uh, we are. I've said this before. I feel like we have become the virus of the earth. That we are destroyers and we are not content with living in harmony with the things that have been given to us here. We've created some beautiful things, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, we are troubled. Our minds become troubled, we become imbalanced. We can't stay balanced for a very long period of time. Like, have you ever heard of 1,000 years of peace. Maybe I just haven't run across that story. But have we ever, as human beings, lived for 1,000 years in peace? Some argue that in ancient Africa we did, but I don't believe that because the tribes warred against each other all the time. And so I was looking at this, what looks like a dragonfly. Anyway, so the borders that we create in our mind, we believe that we are different people, so we create cultures, which, yes, I believe cultures are important because there's beautiful things that come out of culture. We separate ourselves by so many different factors that you would not even think that we are human beings at all. The rabbit hole goes so deep with this that it's just very hard to talk about because it's like where do I start? Where do I hone in at? What do I focus on as far as information to provide? But I think that show Borders does a good job at discussing how the borders were brought about. And I mean, it happens in every single case that either there's a single people and they divide themselves for a particular reason and they start calling each other a different name, but they're the same people. Like when you look at the Asian continent, a lot of Asians get mad because you can't tell the difference between Korean, Chinese, Japanese. Sometimes you just can't tell the difference unless you're just well versed or spend a lot of time with those people. Same thing on the African continents. When you go and you see these people, unless they open their mouths, sometimes you can't tell the difference. And that's for a specific reason, and that's because originally they were the same people. The greatest example of this are the Hutsis and the Tutsis. These are different tribes that have warred with each other, and the conflict was created outside of them. I think the British had something to do with that one. Let me see. I'm about to look that up right now for you because I like to be a little bit accurate. I don't like to throw off too bad. Let's look that one up, y'all. Who created the border between these two people who were seemingly the same? Make sure I'm pronouncing the name right too. So this is Rwanda. Hutu and the Tutsi. So the Tutsis and the Hutu. So I pronounced their name slightly wrong. I apologize. And when we go on here, and I'm about to get into real soon the borders that we're creating here, right here in the United States, the mind borders. And so basically, they went all the way into the DNA on this search that I'm looking at. And this is just a Wikipedia search that you can do a deeper search. I'm just doing a general information. And they were studying the Y chromosome of the group, and it says they are largely of Bantu, um, paternal genetic influences with the Horn of Africa and North Africa. And so the early inhabitants were assimilated. But the Tutsis have considerably more Nilo-Saharan paternal lineages, 14%, than the Hutu, who has 4.3% paternal lineage to the Nilo-Saharan regions. Um, and so this ties into people speaking on the terms that ancestrally they're the same people, okay, and this conflict was created between them. And it goes in to talk about the arguments as to whether or not they're truly the same people. But basically, the major issue is in Rwanda and Burundi. It's considered the Great Lakes region of Africa. Um, and so they're claiming who's more Rwandan than the other, right? And so this became a genocidal problem. They call it the Burundian Genocide. and the First and Second Congo Wars. Okay. Um, there's some scholars of Uganda ancestry that identify four distinct foundations to support the distinct differences between the Hutu and the Tutsi. So there are people who are arguing the difference, the phenotype, genotype, cultural memory of the inhabitants, and archaeological and linguistics. So they're breaking that down into why they are different. Um, and that's where we went into that. But let me go into the conflict because this is not telling me about the conflict. This is talking about the origins. So it's just like I said, there are two people who came from similar regions, maybe some intermingling through other cultures, but overall they're the same people. Unfortunately, arguing, and they put the Twa in here too. Conflict. Let's look at the conflict right now. Oh, my nose. Allergies. All right, let's see if we can get it out of this one. Y'all hear the outside going on around? We got airplanes. We're not too far from the airport. Airplanes going, music, birds, insects. I love the outdoors. Don't you? All right. So they reference an article that talks about social revolution, 59 to 62, and 1990-94 Civil War. And then I could reference Rwandan Civil War. Okay, so they reference what's called the Rwandan Revolution, known as the social revolution or the wind of destruction. It was a period of ethnic violence in Rwanda from 59 to 61 between the Hutu and the Tutsi. Two of three ethnic groups in Rwanda. The revolution saw the country transition from Belgian colony. What did I tell y'all? What did I tell you? I said British, but it's Belgian. But there's always some Western European power trying to bother people. So the Belgian colony with the Tutsi monarchy. I'm sorry, let me read that sentence again. The revolution saw the country transition from Belgian colony with the Tutsi monarchy to an independent Hutu dominated republic. So they were on the side of the Hutu, the Belgian colony was. Or maybe the Belgians were the Tutsi. Let me read more. Okay, so the revolution saw the country transition from a Belgian colony. So it was a Belgian colony with a Tutsi monarchy. So the monarchs of the Tutsi bourgeoisie was in bed with the Belgian colony, and the Hutus got tired of it because probably they weren't benefiting from it. Water. And so, which I haven't even eaten yet, by the way. Some people are like, that is completely unhealthy. That is one school of thought. I will get on the scale again when I go to work, but I almost believe that I'm under my 200-pound mark. Started off at 217, maybe even 221 at a high point, closer to my birthing weight when I was pregnant with Kaylin, post Kaylin, many moons. And so I would say that probably be my heaviest is 223. And so now, last time I weighed myself 203. Side note, sorry. So I think my plan works just fine. I'm not unhealthy, did some lab work. Recently had my healthy visit, and my doctor say my numbers are great. So I don't have any health issues. Sorry, that was a side note. So here we go. Back to them. So Rwanda had been ruled by the Tutsi monarchy since the 18th century. Everything was pro Tutsi and anti Hutu. So this is generally what happens. You know, one cultural group takes control, and if another cultural group is surrounding it, they basically tell them they don't exist. We're not going to respect you. Here we go. Germany and Belgium successfully controlled Rwanda through the early 20th century. So here we are, these foreign powers already added to the turmoil, and they choose a side to decide who to support. With both European nations ruling through the kings and perpetuating a pro Tutsi policy, after 1945, a Hutu counter elite developed, leading to the deterioration of relations between the groups. The Tutsi leadership agitated for speedy independence to cement their power and the Hutu elite called for the transfer of power from Tutsi to Hutu, a stance increasingly supported by the Roman Catholic Church. You don't say, do you? Now, why on earth would the Roman Catholic Church have an interest in this conflict? So the revolution began in 59. Riots, arsons, Tutsi homes attacked, and then followed by an attack of Hutu sub-chief Dominique Mombonwai Mutwa, hard to pronounce for me, by Tutsi extremists. Extremists. Look at all these words thrown around, right? Violence quickly spread throughout the country. The king and Tutsi politicians attempted a counterattack. What word did I say, y'all? King. But I thought Europe only had kings and queens. I thought they were the only people, all these people making this big deal out of this royal wedding. That's a whole other subject for a whole other time. We are not well versed in history around the world, especially as Americans. The king and Tutsi politicians attempted to counterattack and seize power, and atrocities, and ostracized the Hutu and the Belgians, but were thwarted by Belgian Colonel Guy Logeist, who was brought in by the colonial governor. Logeist reestablished law and order. Oh, I love that word is here. Logeist reestablished law and order. Y'all got this is rich. I'm sorry. Beginning a program to promote and protect the Hutu elite. Does this sound like anything to you all? It's like a template. It's like a template, right? This is a template. You're seeing the same kind of strategy employed in these conflicts. Okay? If you look at any general conflict around the world involving a sovereign nation, all you have to do is look at what strategies were employed in order to cause conflict and or resolve conflict, which usually ends in one person being removed out of power and another one put in. That is more recommendable to the other powers that want to see them there, if that makes sense to anyone. The Belgians then replaced many Tutsi chiefs and sub-chiefs with Hutu. So they flipped sides. So he established law and order by then taking the power away from the Tutsis and giving it to the Hutus. But that wasn't originally who they were supporting. Despite continued anti-Tutsi violence, Belgium organized local elections in mid-1960. Oh, look at them, the peacemakers. Hutu parties gained control of nearly all communes, effectively ending the revolution. Logeist and Hutu leader Gregory Kayibanda declared Rwanda an autonomous republic in 1961, and the country became independent in 1962. Thank God for the Belgians, right? Did y'all just hear what I read? When they started off, they were under Belgium lead with the Tutsis. And then later, the same Belgians, maybe over time, power change, maybe political change, but now they supported the Hutus. But it's the same country interfering. Now here's another flip to the story, right? So what happens when people grab power, right? The ones that were being oppressed, naturally they're going to, be more fair, right? So they go on to say that this caused 336,000 Tutsis to flee the neighboring countries, probably because they were afraid that they were going to start doing some of the things they had been doing, right? Although the exiles agitated for an immediate return to Rwanda, they were split between those seeking negotiation and those wishing to overthrow the new regime. And again, this is just one point of view. You have to do some more research to see other points of view. Some exiles formed armed groups called Inyenzi, or cockroaches, by the Hutu government, who launched attacks into Rwanda. The largest occurred in 1963 when a surprise attack approached Kigali. The Government fought back, defeating the Inyenzi and killing thousands of remaining Tutsi in Rwanda. No further threat was posed by the refugees until 1990. So it sounds like the Tutsis had power for a while. They were the predominating power and kingship for a while. That's what it sounds like to me. Like I said, when you start looking into these conflicts and trying to sift through the mess, what was the original sin? I always ask myself. The original sin in my mind was the Tutsis banding with the Belgian government because they don't understand the Western mind. That's my opinion. I'm not saying they were wrong for banding with them. I'm saying that that was probably their first mistake. Anyway, no further threat was posed. Blah blah blah. Some refugees tried to come through in 1990 when the civil war was initiated by the Tutsi Refugee Front Patriotique Rwanda. Remember, it's French being spoke here too in a lot of cases. So French always got their hands in something. Anyway, this led to a rise in Hutu extremism. These words being thrown around. In the 1994 genocide, in which hundreds of thousands of Tutsis were killed. And that's when we came into the conflict and realized, oh my gosh, those darn Hutus are so wrong. But the Tutsis have been doing stuff to them for many years before. So who's wrong, who's right? All right. And so now, the earliest inhabitants of what is now Rwanda were the Twa. So pre-colonial Rwanda was the Twa. So the Tutsis and the Hutu, I'm not going to even say it. I'm just going to try to stay neutral. I'm just shocked. So the earliest inhabitants, it says pre-colonial Rwanda. So obviously the colonial period was when the Tutsi and the Belgian were walking hand in hand. So before that, before the colonial period, the earliest inhabitants of Rwanda were the Twa, a group of Aboriginal pygmy hunter-gatherers who settled in the area between 8,000 and 3,000 BC. Oh, 8,000. Wouldn't that be pre-biblical? Can I be quiet? Anyway, and remain in the country today. Between 700 BC and 1500 AD, a number of Bantu groups migrated into Rwanda and began clearing forests for agriculture. After losing much of their habitat, the forest dwelling Twa moved to the mountains. Wow. Historians have several theories about the Bantu migrations. It's becoming more and more clear that human beings have issues. According to one, the first settlers were Hutu, and Tutsi migrated later. So here we go. The Twa were there. The Bantu tribes of Hutu came in, cleared forests, decimated the land for the Twa. The Twa moved to the mountainous regions because of this. Because if you know the Twa, the pygmy people, they're shorter, smaller people, and the Bantu people are much larger people, and so they could have overpowered them probably easily. And so they're like hobbits in a way. Not trying to be mean or funny or call them a bad name, but just try to get you in the mindset of understanding what these people look like as far as their stature and size. And so they were pushed out to the mountainous areas. The Hutu came in. So now we got to look at some more original sin. The Hutu came in and took away land. Twa moved on. Then the Tutsi came behind them. So the first ruling kingdom, necessarily, as far as when they called it a kingdom of Rwanda, they were saying was ruled by the Tutsi Nyaginya clan. They became increasingly dominant beginning in the 18th century. But if you're talking about something that's going back to 8,000, 3,000 times in the Bantu migrations, I wonder why the Bantu moved there. I would have to look that up. Was their land becoming overwhelmingly unsettled? So that was one theory. It says the alternative theory is that the migration was slow and steady with incoming groups integrating rather than conquering. That sounds probably about right because maybe the Twa people were just like, oh, hey, neighbor, come, let me show you this, let me show you. Isn't that how the indigenous story goes? They see people and they're like, oh, look at these people, how fascinating. They come in and they break bread with them. Now we're talking about on the African continent, y'all. So what was mostly there? What was mostly there? Our darker skinned brothers and sisters. No European nations interfering in that original conflict. So in the second theory, it says the migration was slow and steady with incoming groups integrating into rather than conquering the existing society. In this theory, the Hutu Tutsi distinction arose later as a class distinction rather than a racial one. And that can make a lot of sense too, because as we know as human beings, we love to separate ourselves. We see it now, even in the neighborhood. You can look at a neighborhood in the ghetto, right? What we call the ghetto, in the projects, right? You go into a project, and you actually have people who will say, "Well, we're not as poor as them," or we got more. We got a big screen TV in our project. How can't none of y'all afford nothing? All y'all, can you move out? Can you move out? Can you go buy property and land and have a little bit more ownership? Can you make investments? If the answer is no, then no, you're not better than anyone who's living, and you're not better than them even still. You're not doing better as far as situations. I guess how we should frame this. Are you doing better in your situation? No, you're just buying things, these inanimate objects that have no value really, except the value we put on them, and decide that that's what they're going to be. So we got a lot going on here, man. Just reading that, these are African nations, tribes, and they talk about this all the time. Tribes war with each other. You will have white folks that bring up, well, you guys war with each other all the time. Yes, you're absolutely right. That is absolutely right. But it is still no excuse for your behavior. And if you have an example in which people warred, why are you coming back and doing the same thing? So what makes you any better is my argument to them, at which time they usually get quiet and move on about their business. Don't argue with me, because my arguments are profound and they go deeper than your little superficial arguments about, well, you did the same thing. That's not what it's about. Wow, y'all. Like I said, this subject, I mean, I've spent the hours just trying to touch the surface of this. And I can't even break open this package. I'm still trying to get the envelope open because it's just so much stuff. It is absolutely so much. It's amazing. And I purposely went to African conflict to show you all, no, it's not just the European. It's us. It's us too. And we have to be willing to look at us and make changes. We have to be willing to look at our own truths and make some determination as well. We can't always blame others. We really can't. We cannot blame others. And so today I hadn't really planned on doing as long of a show. Next, I'm going to talk about how the borders of our minds and this divided we fall is taking place and what we're doing now. So, what groups do we have here in America? Let's see if we can name them. Okay. So let's just unfortunately we have to go to religion because religion is a big part of the American purpose. So we have religious groups. So far, we've got, if we're just going to generalize groups, we've got the Christians, the Jewish community, in our own community, the Jewish community, and the Islamic community. The Christian community is broken down into sects. I don't have to name them, you know that. Just to name a few, you got the Hebrew Israelites, you have the Baptists, you have the Methodists, you have the Episcopalians, the Mormons, you have um, and I'm just talking about black culture, okay? You've got I said the Mormons, Episcopalians, Seventh Day Adventists, um, the AMEs, American or African Methodists, Episcopalians. I mean, I left out several, but there are many. Most Black Christian worshipers tend to be Christian by numbers, but that's what we have. And I put that in my show way back, all the different sects of religions. Within the Muslim community, you have the NOI, you have regular practicing Islamists, um, that I know of. I don't see too many sects of Islamic groups, but there are different sects in the way that they practice. And within the Jewish community, I probably should put the Hebrew Israelites more so under the Jewish because their faiths and practices are more Jewish-like than they are Christian-like, although they incorporate some of the same. But they believe in the Old Testament. They really don't push to the New Testament as modern day Christians do. So that's just religion. And then, of course, you have the African spiritualities. You have Buddha. Um, you now have the Kemetic spirituality that's coming more so back into the forefront. Um, I mean, you have Wiccans, faith, which most people attribute that more to the white faith. So Wudan kind of sticks more onto the African witchcraft. Um, and that's just to name a few. I haven't even taken the time to look them all up. I will add them in later. But that's just that. That's just religion, okay? And all the others that fall in between that I haven't recognized here. Now let's talk about our political groups. That's just one divide. Our political groups, you have the Democrats, you have the Republicans, you have some that are in the Green Party, you have the progressive movement now that's gaining a lot of movement. But our country is based on a two-party system, which is the Republicans and the Democrats. But you also have the Libertarian Party. You have, um, there was one that just slipped off my tongue. I just thought of, oh, you have the Socialist Party. I mean, you just have so many parties now that we belong to, that we affiliate and identify with. So that further separates us. I think I'm gonna go back Ethiopian today, y'all. That damn spicy lentil soup, so good. It was so good. I had it last night. Those are on my personal Facebook page. I had some last night. It was delish. I'm hungry. Okay, and I'm not barbecuing. I'm not gonna do it. Okay, and so that's that. And that's our political groups, right? I said progressive. I felt like I missed one that was very important to me that stands out. Oh, you had the independents. Okay. So the independents too. Okay. So we're falling into all those groups, right? Because we're not a monolithic people. We don't think with one mega brain, right? And we have different cultural influences due to our familiar backgrounds, where we live geographically, et cetera, right? And so that's just political parties dividing us. So we have political divide, we have religious divide. And then so we got geographic divide, right? And so where we live, it differs our experience. Kids who grew up in California do not think like people who grew up in New York. Although they're two multicultural societies, the influences are different. New York has abundantly more racial groups in that small little state and even city proper of New York than even Los Angeles. Los Angeles has a lot of cultural groups, but you'll find a lot of the similar things, and they're becoming an extreme melting pot where you're not even really able to tell too much of the differences as much as you used to. So they're more of a melting pot theme. New York is too, but there's still distinctions there. I mean, and it's just because of the history of New York. New York was the city that you came through in order to gain entry into the United States for the most part, besides the Virginia ports, Massachusetts ports, but New York was a very large port for exchange, for commerce, and for human trafficking, so to speak. Um, so that's one thing. And then you have so you talk about political, we talk about geographic. Cities divide us. Okay. That's another divide. So when you're from one city or another, so that's still geographic, though. I still have to put that under the umbrella of geographic. We have different beliefs as far as, our social practices, how we socialize. That makes a difference. We won't socialize with people that we feel are not a part of our class. I mean, there's a thing now in the neighborhood that if you ain't grow up poor, you don't know nothing about nothing because you ain't grow up in the hood. You didn't grow up in this, that, and the other, right? So that's another consideration to take as far as that is concerned. And then um, our family divide is probably the biggest. So families Some families believe that you don't associate with other families based upon whatever their backgrounds are. And so that's just another divide. So all these divides that we create within our own culture groups cause us to separate even more. And then we wonder why we can't come together and make things happen. Well, because Black people, because we're from all over the world, um, and a lot of us have been many places and have come from many places with different concepts as far as, like, you figure people who come from Jamaica, the whole governmental system is slightly different, even though it seems like it's democratic, but it's not. It's still not the same concept as here. Exactly. No two places can be exactly the same. It could be similar, but they're not the same because of different factors. And so even someone who comes from Jamaica, their belief system is going to be slightly different. They're going to have some similarities, but there's going to be some differences due to experience, due to culture, due to religion, etc., etc. You know, a Liberian that comes here is just going to think different. Nigerian, etc., etc. List goes on and on and on. And so when we are trying to battle this thing called racism, bigotry, and colonization, it's going to be very difficult because of our dynamics, because we're so dynamic as people, because we were picked up from so many different areas and thrown into the soup bowl, so to speak, thrown into the salad and expected to um, acclimate. And so on this Memorial Day weekend, I want you all to take that into consideration when we're going out and we're trying to do the work and we're trying to figure out ways to bring us together and we're trying to throw our ideals together. We have to first take into consideration that just like even two people who came from the same Bantu lineage, the Hutu and the Tutsis, they're not even the same. And even when they mixed in with the Twa for years and years and years, they still felt they weren't the same. And so, if these people who share a geographic location and learn to live around each other to a certain degree and still had conflicts and still allow outside influences to be the basis for why they made their decisions, then what makes us so different? Aren't these things going to affect us as well? If we're being pushed and pulled by our political affiliations, by our families, by our own personal belief systems, and you throw that all into the consideration mix, and then we try to wonder why can't we all just get along? This is why we can't all get along because there's too many influences, and I'm not so certain in this battle of trying to get Black people to come on one page that we're going to win in this manner in the way that we're going, which is you see a lot of Black empowerment movements now coming to realize that's like when we know we can't get rid of religion, even though we know religion in a lot of ways has been proven to be the biggest divider of us all. We're not going to be able to get rid of them because people believe what they believe. And you're not going to be able to change them. Once they've committed to that, that is their pathway. And should you change them from their pathway? Because maybe it's making them the decent human being that they are. Maybe it's not. But who are we to individually decide for others? And so this whole concept of border creating and separations, I think, has been the fall of man because we have this need to separate. I was just talking to someone and telling them, I'm sorry, my allergies. I was just talking to someone and telling them that I don't think that we're going to be able to stop dividing ourselves. Um, I don't think we're going to be able to do it. Someone else posted that the only way human beings come together is out of fear, basically. That fear is what brings human beings together and what makes them create a common goal because of fear of loss of life. That's the extreme loss of life or livelihood is what moves people. So as long as they're able to keep kind of their things in place and their personal life is okay, most people are not going to be moved to make any changes that they see happening to their neighbors or to somewhere else because they don't think it's going to breach their borders, right? The borders of their household. Our house is our borders, right? When I go in to close the door, I've created a border from myself and outside world to say, hey, nobody can come in here except for me. I have the key to this door. So we create borders all the time. And now when you look at the House of Consciousness and what it's been trying to do over the last decade or so, um, and other movements like it, the challenges that we are facing is that we are not a monolithic people. Black people have not never been a monolithic people, and we've been placed under this one umbrella of blackness, and that has been the dividing factor between us and other culture groups that choose not to identify with black and how they've tried to incite their control over us. It's so deep and troubling that and I went through that first when it came on. I was hoping you could hear the music and different beats and hear how they're similar and different. But it was just going through all the different tribes in Kenya. You know, that was just in Kenya. And now you're talking about how many countries are in Africa? Let's see. Let's count it. Let me just do a quick Google search. Oops. Mm, oops. I don't know off the top of my head how many countries there are in Africa. Let me just see if I can do a guess. How many before I get my answer? I would say there are 115. Let me see. Right. Okay, too many. 54. I overestimated. It says this includes all internationally recognized territories and states on the continent. The variation is a result of disputed territories. So they are recognized as 54. Excuse me. Excuse me. So there are 54 countries in Africa. I just showed you several different tribes and customs in Kenya, and many of our still practice will still wear their ancestral garb, and they will still go and dance and do their rituals. And so I think it was like 10 different ones on there. So if that see, so you just because you live in a country doesn't mean that you're not further divided into other subgroups. And this is allergies. This is the problem. This is the conflict. This is the difficulty that we will find ourselves in. This is the problem. And I don't think that any of us are equipped to solve this problem. And honestly, I don't think that there's a real solution. There's not going to be a common language, so you're going to need interpreters. The conflicts are going to be different, and so you have to find someone who understands the conflicts and are willing to address them. And just because you address them, don't mean that the people are willing to come to a consensus. Because if one group doesn't feel that they're getting out of it what they intended to get out of it, they're not going to compromise. And so but a lot of these conflicts, in a lot of ways, are headed by greedy people, and they're using other people to push forward their agenda. It's a trip, man. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. It's absolutely overwhelming because it's just like, you know, you we're thinking that, the problem that we have in America is that we just come together, make a plan, and then, we go and try to get back to our home continent, figure out where we're from. But if a young lady who I was telling you about her book way early off on in my show cast, um, Miss Trina Hart, she recently, went to Ghana, and people were saying, "Oh, Ghana's the place to go," and she just went there and she said, "There's turmoil." She's being honest. Her visual, being from the states, we're from the states, right? We're used to living a certain kind of lifestyle, and so you go to another country and you realize that the infrastructure isn't even the same, or nearly about the same. And how do you get it the same? And you find out that the government in which they're operating is not necessarily working in the interest of the people. And so one realization you come to is not that America is just so great that we can't move on to somewhere else, but if we do decide to move on to somewhere else eventually and make it the utopia that we want it to be, that there is still conflict going on that is out of our control, that don't have anything to do with us. It's outside of our control. It was created while we were over here, and the players are not going to allow any outside forces to come in and say, "Hey, we can help you." Why should they trust us? And so it's this dynamic that's going on that's so complicated. And as you begin to do more research and study, you realize it is the world. I don't mean to sound like a doomsday person, but we are destroying this world, meaning the social construct in which we are living. These conflicts are rising because we somehow allow those who don't have very good um, ideals for the interests of the people. They could care less about the people, the majority. They want it for themselves. And once they have it for themselves and just sitting around like, I've got it all, as far as money, it's usually about money, that monetary thing, right? Control of resources. Um, and once they have it, they just want to sit on it. They don't want to do anything with it. They just want to hoard it. And so you're talking about on the leadership level, what you're talking about are people with a psychosis so deep um, that you can't even touch it because they're wealthy. And so their ability to think and their ability to reason is not into question because a lot of people push that aside because they're wealthy. They'll say, oh, well, they're rich. They have to be sane. They're rich. And that's because that's the measure in which we live. We live by the wealthy status of people and their sanity. That's why in America we value what celebrities have to say because they've reached a wealth status, and so we just assume that they've taken the time to study. But when they open their mouths and talk, you realize that they haven't studied a damn thing except whatever it is that they needed to become wealthy. But that doesn't mean that they're well versed in the world, things of the world. It doesn't mean that they know anything about outside of the culture in which they live, which is, lifestyles of the rich and famous, Robert Leach, right? And so we have to begin to consider these things. The people that we're looking up to as leaders, how close or far are they from the conflict? Do they understand what the conflict really is? Do they understand what is happening around them? And do they have any resources or tools to actually apply mechanisms to help make it better? And a lot of times the answer is no, because they haven't taken the time to actually study it. And just because they're wealthy doesn't mean that they know what they're talking about. We think wealth equals knowledge, and it doesn't. They are two separate things. They are not the same thing, and they do not have to go along with each other. Just because people are wealthy don't mean they're smart. It doesn't mean that they're wise. It doesn't mean that they um, care. It doesn't mean that they have the care within them to even focus on the issues. They might be looking at a situation for what they can get out of it. You know, even people who are wealthy who look like us. People look at things by the angle. And so that's what's been heavy on my heart looking at all this going on. The new argument in the House of Consciousness is the Aboriginal people. And the Aboriginal people are making an argument that we've always been here. They're using Dr. Ivan Van Sertima's work. And I don't think that's what Ivan Van Sertima meant by his work, but that's what they're using it. They're using his arguments to say that we are the Aboriginals here. Some are using the term Aboriginal, some are using Indigenous, some are using Native peoples. But the overall argument, what? My honey bun is overseas, and so he just sent me a message about something that's going on over there. And so that makes sense to what happened earlier with a phone call I tried to make to him. But anyway, um, the point is that uh, I don't know. Just being the observational person that I've always been, I observe people. I observe, I observe, I observe. It's just been something I've done since childhood. And when I observe, I learn so much. And then I research. And then when I research, I begin to learn a little bit more about it. I've researched the Hutus and the Tutsis. I always mess their names up. And the Twa. I've researched those folks too. And so it's interesting seeing what's written down as far as their conflict. And when you realize that they've intermingled and intermixed, right, as human beings, and you realize you all become the same people again, just because you're part Twa or part Hutu or part Hutu and part Tutsi or part Tutsi and part Twa, when did you all separate? At what point were the cultures separated? Which I heard pygmy is not a positive word to call those people. That's not, I don't think that's the original term. I think Twa is the term that they prefer. And pygmy was more of a racist term. It's so hot out here. This is already melted. I had a thing full of ice in here. I was playing you all the music. But the question is, do we understand the conflicts between people? And what tools are we going to be able to employ to bring people together? Because if we're talking about an eventual regression back to, or progression back to the continent over time, where we're starting to invest in the continent again, we begin to incorporate some of those spiritual systems back into our spiritual systems, some of those ways of life, cultural practices back into our cultural practices. What's going on with the cultural practice today? And if you go over there now, are you going to be able to convince the people who are there that the direction that they're going in is not correct? How are you going to convince grown people who have been doing things a certain way all this time and you are a foreigner? I don't care what your skin color looks like. You can go in any area of Africa as an American black person, an African American, and even term the African American, they'll snort at, laugh at, look at you like I don't. That's a term you all created. How are you African American? You were born over there. You've been over in that country for many generations. Look at your skin. You could tell that you mixed into those people. You know, and so this is a shock that many of us may not be ready for. You know, some people will treat you with kindness. Many people will treat you with kindness, as I've heard people say as they've traveled. But I've also heard people say that there's a element there that's like, no, you're not gonna just come over here with your American attitudes, thinking that you're going to take over what we're doing over here. We know what we're doing because we know this better. In a way, can you blame them? Can you say, well, we know better? Isn't that the European way? To say that you know better than the people who are dealing in the conflict? So, man, the work is becoming more real. It's becoming more deep. Before we open our mouths and say we need to do this and we need to do that and they need to do this and they need to do that, we're going to have to do some heavy, extensive research onto what's going on. We can't even fix what's going on in our own country. We can't even get black people to work together here. And we haven't really gone, honestly, black people on this continent have never gone through any intercultural war. We've never been in a civil war dispute with each other than, okay, the street gang violence, yes. We have created gangs. I would have to look at that as cultural wars. I can't take away from that. I don't want to be ignorant and say we haven't. But I'm saying like a large scale where when you see us on the street, we just overwhelmingly, it don't matter where you go. When you see us, we like, no, no, you are south, a southern black, and you're a northern black, and we're gonna fight. We haven't had that. But we have had internal city gang wars that we've created that I guess they just as nonsensical as some of these other conflicts we're reading about. So it begs the question, is it Western influence or is it human being problem? I have to ask that question. And it's all black over here. I am pro black, period. But if I'm really going to be pro black, am I able to tell the truth about myself and my people? Am I able to look at, if I go over to Ghana, over to Kenya, over to Ethiopia, and I say, my people, and they look at me like, who are you talking to? Do they really genuinely feel the same love for us that we feel for the missing love in them? It's like an adopted child trying to get back with the mom, and the mom's like, well, I got over that a long time ago. These are all realities that we're going to have to face. And so that's my topic for today. It's so deep. I can't dive into all of it. I just gave some general information to get you all the brain. That's the purpose of my show, is to get that brain thinking, because I think we jump into things and we don't really work out what we're looking for, what we really want. So anyway, that's my show. I love you all as always. I'm gonna just keep you thinking. I'm gonna keep thinking, and I'm keep trying to come up with reasons and ideas why we need to keep the dialogue going. So hope you learned something from it, and I'll post as much as I can. I still got a lot of shows to catch up, information to put in there from my show. So I'll be working on that this week, y'all. Apologize for the delay, but this decompression is real. Talk to y'all next time. This has been Elephant in the Room. I am your host, Maya Institute, the melanated educator. Peace.